welcome to my new video series, which is about creating strength programs. There's going to be different series, so one on supplementation, one on strength program, one on lifting technique, and any others which you might want to see. So the first series is obviously the strength programming series, and there's going to be multiple videos in that. And in the videos, we will start by classifying lifts, building the picture up of them bricks into training blocks, when to use each type of lift for very specific purposes, and then fleshing it out into microcycles, mesocycles, macrocycles, and all that good stuff. So let's get started. So the first episode in this series is exercise classification. And the reason why this series is first is because the classification of each individual exercise will be making up the bricks of the whole of the training structure. So a lot of people start top down. I'm starting from bottom up, and the reason is there'll be a lot of the terminology used in this when we go on to assemble larger training structures and blocks and all the good stuff like that. So moving on, the first classification, in fact, the four classifications of lifting are sport form exercises, specialized development exercises, specialized preparatory exercises, and general preparatory exercises. So the sport form exercise is the competition lifts themselves. We have to train the sport form exercises, especially if we are powerlifters, because the SAID principle, which is specific adaptation to imposed demands, states that we get better at what we practice. So we have to, as a powerlifter, we have to powerlift. Pure and simple. The requirements for the criteria for SFE is the lift has to be identical to the competition lifts. In terms of bench press, that can be an exception to the rule. So there's a pause in competition bench press, but technically, even on touch and go, there is a pause because even though it's very, very small, there has to be a part of the lift where it transitions from eccentric to concentric, also called the amortization phase, where the velocity is zero. So there is a pause, even though it's very, very small. Not only that, being a powerlifter, having two lower body movements, so squat and deadlift, and two upper body movements, which would be competition bench press and touch and go bench press, sort of balances things out and makes everything a little bit more redistributable and balanced in terms of loading between upper and lower body. So for it to be relevant for sport form exercise, it has to be done like higher than 80-85%. That's around where we recruit all of our motor units. So if you are lifting 80-85% with maximal intent, you're probably recruiting as much fiber and contractile tissue that you would be as if you was doing a 1 rep max. The only difference is, as you put more and more weight on the bar, you don't really apply much more force, just the bar speed will slow down to the point where you fail the lift. So a perfect example of loading can be on the screen now, I'm hoping, which is typically 1 rep at RPE 8 to 9, 8.5 as an average, and then some doubles and triples with a small drop off from them. So moving on from sport form exercise is probably what I deem as the most important and the most effective is specialized development exercises, or SDE. Now, the easiest way to describe SDE is part of all of the competition lifts, the SFE, but done or modified in a way to address a certain weakness or ROM or position. So a perfect example of that would be a paused squat, for example. So a paused squat would be just like the competition lift, but with a pause thrown in, or a tempo squat, or even bands. So as you can see, the stance, the bar position, the bar, the equipment, everything is identical. The only thing that changes is the range of the motion. The easiest way to think of it is if you could take a picture and Photoshop out all of the equipment, you would think it's the competition lift. Obviously don't Photoshop out the bar because it just look a bit weird. So here's where a lot of people go wrong with training. So for example, with bench press, an extended paused bench would be a valid exercise, a block press, a slingshot, and that's because the mechanics, the positions, the body position are all identical to the sport form exercise. However, if you do an incline bench or a close grip bench, even for very similar reps as what you typically do for the competition lifts, it's no longer SDE because it's too far removed technically. So SDE has to look identical to the competition lifts, even though there may be bands involved and stuff like that. So, and typically the loading has to be super relevant too. So it can be as low as singles and doubles. Typically 3 to 5 reps tends to be the sweet spot, and it has to be strength focused. If it's for example, you could do triples with competition lifts and light. That's probably not SD because it's too light, so it's not sport form. And the strength, the loading is just not specific enough. So we're powerlifters, and the goal is load, is force production. And if we're moving the force too far down the spectrum, it's no longer a specialized development exercise. It comes under other types of movements, which, moving on. Before we do that, this slide just covers what we've just spoke about, which is the criteria for the SDE. I'll just leave that for a few seconds if you want to get a screenshot or just have a quick scan over. But it's pretty much everything we just discussed. The third criteria is specialized preparatory exercise. Now, this is the first transition away from strength towards hypertrophy. Yeah, of course, there's an element of strength, but it's all about structural adaptations where a lifter probably needs it. It doesn't need to be targeted. It can be generic, especially for beginner lifters. However, the purpose of the SPE is to increase the muscle and the training capacity and the potential of the lifter so that when they train the SD, especially aggressively, they don't burn out. They can handle that weight. They can handle the loading. And then the SDE the SP prepares to do the SDE, and then the SDE allows for high performance sport form exercises. So the key principles behind the SP, the criteria are: it must train some or all of the muscularity used in the competition lift. And I don't mean like justifying training lats for bench, because that muscularity of lats is used, but they're not a prime mover. They're more of a stabilizer or an enabler. So the prime movers in the bench will be the pecs, the front delts, the triceps. So on that criteria, it can be very generic. So, for example, tricep dips or dumbbell overhead press falls within this category, but they're generic examples, and they're best served off-season or for beginner lifters. For more advanced lifters, especially in season or coming up to competition, the SP exercise examples will probably best be close grip bench press, incline bench press, stuff that resembles a part of the movement itself, but not quite SDE. Now, as we know, muscle growth occurs in all rep ranges, or most rep ranges, as long as they're not at the extremes. So we tend to push this towards the 6 to 15 reps, but it can be high as 20 or even 25 in a lot of studies shows decent amounts of muscle gain. But I believe this should be some common sense thrown in there. Incline bench with 25 reps, you're probably going to burn out from blood running out of your arms before your front delts or upper pecs get fatigued from adaptation. Stimulus. So yeah, a perfect example would be 3 sets of 8. That's a good balance. It has to be relatively high RPE because the stress, like muscle growth, occurs from stress, and stress has to be high on that muscle, whether it be mechanical through lifting heavy or metabolic through like the burn, the lactic acid, that sort of stuff. So think typically bodybuilding, but bias it towards being a powerlifter. So yeah, moving on, the next and final classification, almost final classification, there'll be a footnote which we'll cover after, are GP exercises, which are general preparatory exercise. Now, GP exercises are there to support training overall, which could be something as far removed as bicep curls for elbow health. It could be dumbbell rows, barbell rows, lat pull down. So the stabilizing muscles and the protective muscles and movements that we probably should do as a powerlifter, even though they're not the driver. A lot of people will say, oh, get a big upper back if you want to improve your bench. Like, absolute bullshit. Like, your upper back, I'm not saying an upper back is not important, because it absolutely is, but increasing your upper back strength is not going to improve your bench. I've got people that do tug of war for England, and they've got some of the strongest upper backs I've ever met. They can't bench the way out of a wet paper bag. They don't have big bench presses. They pull, 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 and their upper back and pulling muscles are ridiculously developed and strong, but they're not big bench presses. So that's quite a big demographic as well. So it's not like the outliers. It's just a fact. If you've got you should not be substituting pressing movements for upper back. It's GPE stuff, but GPE should still be done, just not pushed as aggressively as important as the prime movers for our sport. It could even be things like core work, so abs, so bracing. Obviously on squat, if you've got weak abs and rely too much on a belt, it opens the door to injury or form breakdown, especially if something is slightly off and you're off kilter. There's a good chance that instead of being able to deal with it, it's going to pull you excessively over to one direction, and then your technique will just go out the window and it'll break down. So that's the perfect example for GP. Now, the next episode in this series will be covering what exercises to use for very specific purposes. So a perfect example would be someone who hits the bottom of the squat, comes out the hole very fast, but their hips shoot, so they're more leant over, and then they take more on the back. So what SPX sizes should they use? What SDX sizes should they use? What GP should they use, if any? And then after episode 2, we're going to start build a training week on an example lifter based on certain weaknesses. So yeah, I look forward to that. And then episodes 4, 5, and 6 will build onto that. So instead of just doing a single training week, we'll build a training block and then a training cycle, which will be made up of multiple blocks. So yeah, lots to look forward to, and first video. So thanks for watching if you made it this far. Cheers.